You don't walk into Langley the first day thinking you're going to do anything wrong. That's the thing nobody tells you and the thing that matters most. You walk in thinking the opposite. You walk in thinking that the specific combination of intelligence, discipline, and willingness you bring to this building is exactly what separates the people who protect the country from the people who couldn't. You scored in the 97th percentile on the ASVAB. You speak 2 languages fluently and a third passably. You ran a 620 mile at your physical assessment. You passed a polygraph that asked you questions no employer has ever asked you about drug use and sexual behavior and whether you've ever committed a crime that wasn't detected. And you answered honestly, and the machine believed you, and so did the examiner, and so did the security officer who reviewed your file. And now you have a TS/SCY clearance and a badge that gets you through a door that most people in this country don't know exists. You feel, on that first morning, genuinely chosen. If you've ever wanted to understand what that feeling costs you eventually, this is how it actually goes. The clandestine service, what used to be called the Directorate of Operations, is where you're headed. Not analysis, not signals, human intelligence, HUMINT, the art of getting actual human beings to tell you things they're not supposed to tell anyone. The CIA has roughly 21,000 employees. The number of case officers in the field at any given time, the people who actually run agents and recruit sources and conduct operations, is classified. But the informed estimate runs between 5,000 and 7,000 globally. You are going to become one of them. First, you have to survive the farm. The farm is the informal name for the clandestine service training facility in rural Virginia. Officially a military installation you are not supposed to acknowledge by name. You spend approximately 18 months there. You learn surveillance and counter-surveillance, how to follow someone through a city without being seen, and how to know when you're being followed, which turns out to require completely rebuilding how you move through public space, how you use reflections and natural pause points in the geometry of streets to maintain awareness without telegraphing awareness. You learn to drive in ways your driver's education instructor never imagined. You learn tradecraft, dead drops, brush passes, signal sights, the specific choreography of passing information or material to an agent without the meeting ever visibly happening. You learn to construct a cover identity, a legend, that can survive moderate scrutiny from a foreign intelligence service. You learn what moderate scrutiny feels like, because they subject you to it, repeatedly, in scenarios designed to produce the specific anxiety of knowing someone is trying to find the seam in your story. You also learn, more quietly, the ethical architecture of the work. The instructors don't call it that. They call it operational security and risk management and asset valuation. But what they're actually teaching you, underneath the vocabulary, is how to think about human beings as instruments. An asset, the person you've recruited to provide intelligence, has a value that is calculated in terms of access, reliability, and security risk. You are taught to assess that value clearly and to make decisions based on it. The asset's personal safety is a factor in that calculation. It is not the primary factor. The intelligence is the primary factor. You absorb this framework without fully registering that you're absorbing it because it's delivered in the neutral language of professionalism. And in the neutral language of professionalism, almost anything sounds reasonable. Your first posting is Ankara, Turkey. You're under diplomatic cover, officially a mid-level attaché in the embassy's economic section, which means you attend some meetings and file some reports and maintain the fiction of a job that doesn't exist so that the job that does exist remains invisible. Your cover is solid. You've practiced it for 18 months. You know your legend the way you know your own history, which is to say you know it better, because your legend has been stress-tested in ways your actual biography never was. Your job in Ankara is to develop relationships. You go to receptions, conferences, the kind of mid-tier diplomatic social events where the right third secretary from the right ministry might be present, feeling undervalued, drinking a little more than he should, willing to talk to someone who listens well. Listening well is a skill you have practiced to a level most therapists never reach. You ask questions that feel like interest and function like excavation. You find the thing that a person wants: recognition, money, safety, revenge against someone who wronged them. And you position yourself as the person who can provide it, or who knows someone who can, or who at minimum understands in a way that no one else does. This is called development. It precedes recruitment, and it requires you to genuinely like the people you're doing it to, or to perform genuine liking so consistently that the performance becomes indistinguishable from the real thing, which is its own kind of erosion. Your first significant development target is a man in his mid-40s who works in the Turkish Foreign Ministry's Russia desk. His name in your operational files is Cardinal. His real name you know but don't use. He has a daughter at a university in London who is studying architecture, and he's paying her tuition out of a government salary that hasn't kept pace with Ankara's inflation. And when he mentions this at a dinner, you express sympathy that is genuine because you've read his financial file and you know exactly how tight it is. You have 3 more dinners with Cardinal over 6 weeks. You pay every time. You send him a book he mentioned once, shipped to his office, a small thing, casual, the kind of thing a friend does. By the 3rd month, you're meeting for coffee on Saturday mornings. He's telling you things about internal ministry discussions that your station chief describes as genuinely useful, which is the most enthusiastic language your station chief uses. You haven't asked Cardinal for anything yet. You won't for another 2 months. The ask, when it comes, has to feel like a natural extension of the relationship, not a transaction. It has to feel like you're asking a friend for a favor, not recruiting an asset. The distinction between those two things is the thing you're paid to make invisible. You make it invisible. Cardinal becomes an agent. He signs nothing. There is no document. There is only a conversation in a park where you explain what you'd like him to share going forward and what you're able to provide in return. And he sits quietly for a long moment and then nods. And you feel something that is genuinely complicated because you like this man, and what you've just done to him is not something a friend does. His intelligence proves to be accurate and useful for 11 months. Then something shifts in his reporting. The information gets slightly softer, slightly less specific. You flag it to the station chief, who tells you to pressure him for harder access. You meet Cardinal and you push. He's uncomfortable. He says he's being more careful. You say careful is fine, but the information he's providing has become less useful, and usefulness is what protects him, which is true, and also a threat disguised as concern, and he knows it, and you know he knows it, and the friendship, such as it was, shows its actual architecture in that moment. He produces better intelligence for 3 more months. Then, he disappears. Not literally. He stops returning contact signals. His deadfall, the drop site where he leaves material, goes unused for 6 weeks. You report this. The station chief reports it upward. The conclusion, eventually, is that Cardinal has been identified by Turkish counterintelligence and is either under surveillance or has been arrested quietly, which in Turkey sometimes looks like the same thing. You never find out which. You never find out what happened to him. You close the file. You open a new development target. His name in your operational files is Meridian. He works in the energy ministry. His daughter is in university in Germany. You are 3 years into this life, and you have stopped noticing the specific feeling you had in the park with Cardinal. Not because you've resolved it, because the operational tempo doesn't leave room for it, and because the institutional culture treats that kind of feeling as a liability rather than a signal, and because you have learned, with the same precision you brought to surveillance and cover maintenance, to route around it. The work requires this. The work produces this. You tell yourself those are the same thing. Your second posting is Beirut. Beirut is not Ankara. Ankara is complicated and occasionally dangerous. Beirut is a city where 4 separate intelligence services are operating simultaneously, where a wrong meeting in a wrong location can be the last meeting you have, where the infrastructure of the cover life you've built has to be maintained under conditions that Ankara never prepared you for because nothing really prepares you for Beirut except Beirut. You arrive in 2019, which means the economic collapse hasn't happened yet, but everyone who knows the country can feel it coming the way you feel weather and old injuries. The city is beautiful and broken at the same time, and you understand that combination in a way you didn't when you first got to the farm. Your target in Beirut is access into Hezbollah's external security apparatus, not the military wing directly. The financial network that services the military wing, which runs through legitimate businesses and real estate holdings and currency exchange operations across 3 countries. You're looking for a source with enough proximity to that network to provide intelligence on funding flows, which will be used to support Treasury Department sanctions designations, which will be used to disrupt operational capacity. This is how it's described in your operational tasking. The chain of logic is clean on paper. On the ground, the chain of logic requires you to develop relationships with people who are, by any definition, connected to an organization that has killed American citizens, and to do so without getting killed yourself, and to produce intelligence that will be used in ways you will not be involved in and will not be told about, and to not think too carefully about the second and third order consequences of the sanctions you're enabling. Because thinking carefully about consequences is not in your operational tasking. You recruit a source, Orient in the files, who is a mid-level accountant at a currency exchange in the southern suburbs. He's not an ideologue. He's a man who is in too deep with people he can't get away from, and who decides that working with you is the only leverage he has. You don't tell him that sources in his position have a statistical likelihood of eventually being identified. You tell him you'll protect him, which is true as a statement of intent and uncertain as a statement of capability. And you know the difference and he doesn't, and you let that stand because the operation requires it. Orient provides useful intelligence for 14 months. Then comes a night in November when you get a call from a contact who tells you that Orient's name has come up in a conversation it shouldn't have come up in. You have approximately 6 hours to get him out or accept that he can't be gotten out. You call your station chief. The station chief calls Langley. Langley takes 4 hours to respond, during which you sit in a safe house with a phone that isn't ringing and a window that faces the street in the specific quality of darkness that Beirut has at 3 in the morning. The response, when it comes, is that extraction is not feasible given current resources and risk exposure, and that you should sterilize your communications with Orient and await further instruction. You think about Orient for a long time after that, not constantly, in the specific way that certain things live at the edge of your awareness, present enough to shape the texture of your thinking without being directly confronted. You did what you were instructed to do. You were instructed to do it by people with more information than you had. The decision was made at a level above yours, which is true, and which does not mean you are not accountable, and which you have mostly stopped examining directly. By your 10th year, you are a senior case officer with the reputation for producing quality intelligence in difficult environments. You've been to 5 countries. You've recruited 19 assets, of which 14 produced useful intelligence, of which 3 are no longer in contact for reasons that vary and that you don't enumerate when someone asks how the career is going. You're being considered for a station chief position. The job involves managing a team of 8 officers, overseeing a portfolio of operations, and being accountable to Langley in a way that is more political than the fieldwork, which is its own skill set that you've had to develop. You're also 41 years old, and you've been married for 9 years to a woman who knew what the job was in the abstract and has spent 9 years discovering what it is in practice, which includes a husband who cannot discuss 70% of his work life, who moves through public spaces with an attention that has no off switch, who wakes sometimes from dreams he doesn't describe, who is kind and present and also somehow not entirely reachable. She has not left. You don't know whether this is love or inertia or the specific loyalty of someone who has reorganized her life around a person and finds that reorganization too expensive to undo. You don't ask because you already know you can't answer it honestly, and the gap between what you know and what you can say is so habitual now that you sometimes forget it's a gap at all. The work you do matters. You believe this. It's not self-deception. The intelligence you've produced has contributed to operations that disrupted real threats, protected real people, changed real outcomes. You've seen the finished intelligence products, the policy decisions that downstream from the raw reporting you spent months developing. The chain is real. You're a real part of it. What you've also done is recruit human beings into dangerous positions and manage them as instruments and sometimes not been able to protect them when the machinery moved faster than the moral accounting. Both of those things are true at the same time. You hold them the way you've learned to hold everything, without resolving them, because resolution isn't available, and the work continues regardless. Somewhere tonight, a 23-year-old with a 97th percentile test score and 2 languages and a clean polygraph record is sitting across from a recruiter in a building without a publicly listed address. And the recruiter is describing a career of consequence and meaning, and the 23-year-old is feeling, for the first time, genuinely chosen. Everything the recruiter is saying is true. Everything the recruiter isn't saying is also true. And the 23-year-old, who's sharp enough to have gotten this far, will not know how to ask about the second category, because the second category is the thing you only learn from the inside. That's how it works.